There we go. All right, beautiful. So just while we're waiting for a couple of other people to join us, and just to reiterate, if you've got any questions during the presentation, just pop them into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer them as we go, if we can. If not, you can save your questions to the end. Hey, Shada.
Hello.
And we'll have 10 minutes for questions at the end. You can have your video on if you want, but we are recording the session. So up to you if you want to leave. We won't record the Q&A part at the end. So if you want to leave your videos off until we get to the actual question part, that's fine too. All right, so that's our last person joining now, I think. Yes, beautiful. Okay.
Here we go.
So we've got Amanda and I will be talking for the next 50 minutes. You can ask questions via the chat function while the presentation is going, and there'll be a 10-minute Q&A section at the end. Feel free to leave your cameras off and keep yourself muted if you're happy with that. And then we will check in with everybody at the end, make sure we've answered all of your questions, and tell you a little bit about Parenting in a Pandemic Part 2, which is booked for 3 weeks' time. So I suppose I'll kick off with my introduction. So,
Sure.
So I'm Danielle. Oh. I'm Danielle Graber. I'm the director at 12 Point Psychology here in Ferntree Gully. We are currently doing most of our sessions via telehealth at the moment, and Amanda is one of our lovely clinicians who is working under those conditions at the moment. And Amanda has been doing a great job working with families, particularly those who have children who are dealing with school refusal and difficulties with sorry, Judy's just joined us from a beach somewhere. Very nice, very nice.
I wish.
Yeah, gotcha. So Amanda is a counsellor and a secondary school teacher, and the more we talked about the challenges that so many of our clients were facing at the moment in terms of managing their own stresses in terms of COVID, but also the stresses that their children might be feeling in relation to school, in relation to learning from home, all the rest of it, the more we kind of thought this was something that would be useful to put out there. And so Amanda has come up with this presentation, and I'm going to hand it over to her. So we'll do a little bit of a Q&A thing. So I thought, Amanda, if we kick off with just you telling us a little bit about you and what you do and what you're hoping to be able to present tonight.
Sure. Hello, everybody. So yes, as Danielle mentioned, I'm a teacher. So I worked in secondary. I am primary trained and have done a bit in primary. But I do have more expertise with the secondary guys, and obviously working as a counsellor with 12 Points. So I actually, in my role, predominantly work with adolescents. I seem to get a few younger ones, sort of 9, 10, but then through to 16 is sort of my main gamut that I work with. And at the moment, a lot of them are being triggered by, obviously, as Danielle said, this really strange situation that we're finding ourselves in. So these children that are seeing me and their parents have already been struggling with some aspect of school issues, some of them chronic school refusers, some of them teetering on the edge of it, other issues to do with social situations, things like that are all coming through. And I notice there's a very strong connection between all of my clients in that a lot of the parents are taking a lot of the blame on themselves when things aren't working at home. And then it sometimes goes, well, then that's the teacher's problem. then the teacher also isn't sure what's going on either, and there's a complete breakdown in communication. And so then they end up, I've been spending a lot of time with parents and not just their children at the moment, when usually I'm working more with the kids. I'm finding the parents are needing a place to talk and work through what do I do. So this presentation I've broken down into the main things that I have come across in my own practice of working with, well, 9 to 16-year-olds, but you could apply some of this stuff to younger, and also their parents or extended family. So the first thing is a lot of people don't understand, from what I'm seeing, the actual psychological impact of the whole restriction process. So I thought we'd touch on that quickly. Some of you will know that inside and out, and I'm hoping I'm not telling you to suck eggs, but I just think it's also very useful for parents to be able to understand this. And I think definitely adolescents as well benefit from this as well. Then I thought we'd look at managing isolation, tips and strategies, understanding what that actually is. A big one is clarifying expectations across all 4 of those. So parent, child, family, teacher and the school. There's definitely a breakdown of communication going on right now. Then I'll go through managing the challenges of learning at home, and then specific child adolescent challenges. I've got some resources for you guys, and then it's the Q&A at the end. So I'm on hiatus at the moment, but I am a working teacher. So I was teaching online at the beginning of the pandemic. So I can sort of answer questions from that teaching perspective if you want, not just from the counselling perspective. I'll do my best from my own experience of it. So feel free to, if anything comes up along that, then by all means go ahead. But I thought we'll get into the first part, which is understanding the psychological impact of COVID-19 restrictions. So
Amanda, sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to say with this one, even though we've got a bit of a mix of parents and clinicians on board for this and for the recording as well, I do want the clinicians, even though you'll look at this and kind of go, yeah, I know this stuff, I go through this with my clients all the time, I want you to have a look at this as it's applying to you right now as well, because I'm definitely seeing a lot of my supervisees struggling with this stuff and almost feeling like we should be immune to this because we know it. And it doesn't work like that. So I think it might be quite nice to sit back for a minute, take your clinician hat off and just think about this stuff as it applies to you personally, not just to your clients. So
yes.
that's my 2 cents for that one. And then now I'm going to mute myself and leave you to it.
Oh, you don't have to mute yourself. I certainly want your expertise as we go along. This, we can send you guys the slides of this too. I'm happy for you to use any of this if you'd like it. But explaining what actually the nervous system is, most clients will struggle to tell you what that is in much detail or how it actually operates. So in terms of COVID, a good way to explain it is that your system's constantly assessing the environment. It's constantly looking to see, am I safe or am I in danger? So what's happening obviously at the moment is a lot of people, their senses are heightened into a state of threat, basically. So that forces them to focus on that more, having trouble being able to switch off from it, particularly in the world of social media and TV and all that jazz. So here we are ready to fight the threat. And then good old example of back in old times, you would see a bear and you would hit into flight mode and bolt. And obviously that's a great concept for the bear is not going to be hanging around. The bear will either give up or eat you, but it's not going to go on for days. It's not going to go on for weeks. It's not going to go on for months or potentially years. And this is what the issue is with COVID. So the COVID does not operate like a bear. It does not operate on a system that our physiological system is able to manage. So the idea of the whole pandemic is that it's unstable and it's an unknown quantity. We don't know how long this is hanging around for. We don't know how it's changing. There's talk on the news of mutations. We'll suddenly hear about a new cluster pops up and they can't work out how it got there. So you're dealing with all of that. So what happens is we can't use the flight response properly. So we can't actually go, right, I need to go into fight mode or I need to get away from it. We just can't. So we can't, as I've said here, we can't fight the virus other than protecting ourselves. And until the vaccine comes in, we have to leave it to the professionals to work on that. But for now, we're helpless into how we could actually fight this ourselves other than keeping ourselves safe and at home and masked up when we're out. And same thing, we can't get away from it, especially us Melburnians. Danielle, are we all Melburnians in here? I forgot to ask that.
Majority are Melburnians, yeah. There's a couple I'm not 100% sure where they're from, but majority are definitely Melburnians. And I reckon if there's any New South Welshmen in here, they're probably going to be where we are fairly soon from the looks of it.
Yeah. So it's that whole idea of we really can't run from it. We can't leave our own local areas. We can't. So we are confined to that space at home. So we cannot use that our nervous system responses appropriately. So we've got this built up energy. We know there's a threat. We want to be able to act on it and we can't. So that converts into some of these things that I've listed here. And there's plenty more that I'm sure you will have come up with across in your own work if you are a clinician. And these are really important with children to recognise. So I do hear a lot of parents saying to me, oh, he's just so angry at me all the time because he's making me do this work at home. And I'm just so, I don't know what to, I'm so frustrated because he just keeps yelling at me and storming off to his room. And we need to take a step back and look at that as to what actually is that behaviour, what's driving that behaviour. And teenagers are that tricky category where it can be purely I am standing my ground and I want to let it all out. But generally, we can attribute a lot of the things that are going on to this list here. So, and it's coming from that inability to express what's going on for them. So they're hearing bits and pieces about COVID, but not actually, there's nothing they can do about it. They're even less in control in a lot of ways than the parents are.
Yeah,
and they also don't know how to formulate that at all.
We're struggling so much with our sense of powerlessness, and then they're one step further removed from that. And I know, well, this week there's been a bunch of kids who, you know, went back to school and now their schools have been closed because of outbreaks. So that just constant, all right, I'm getting ready and I'm back to school. And for a kid who was anxious about going back to school in the first place, that takes a lot of guts. And then I made it back a day, I got through it, and now, oh no, back at home. And that just constant uncertainty, and I don't know what we're doing from one day to the next. That's pretty wearing for us, let alone for a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the kind of clients I'm working with who are already struggling with a lot of anxiety around school attendance, they have a very real fear of, I don't want to go back to school because I don't trust that the school system is going to keep me safe. But some of them are able to identify and articulate, there's no social distancing going on. It's at school. I could get it. And the vast majority of my clients are not worried about themselves because they're even aware that this tends to really affect older generations. They're petrified that something might happen to mum or dad or grandma or uncle or whoever it might be. So again, that's something beyond their control. They can't control if mum decides, you know what, I'm not going to wear a mask anymore. I'm fine. They've got no control over that. And even if mum is wearing a mask, then they start worrying beyond that. Well, what if mum comes in contact with someone that's not wearing a mask? All of that builds up. So the usual thing of focusing on you can't control others, you can only control yourself and how you behave and act, sort of a bit of a tricky grey area in this particular pandemic because you can't control anyone else, but at the same time, they're very much focusing on their parents or whoever it is. So that's just something to consider for those of you that are parents and are here for that side of things. is actually, and I'll talk about that a bit later, is actually understanding those behaviours and what might be driving them. So keep that fight-flight response in the back of your mind, because that is playing a part in what they're doing at home. So moving on to managing isolation, I just wanted to share this concept with you. I don't know how many of you have heard of this before, but I really, really like it. It was presented by Christine Moutier, who's a psychiatrist in the States, and she presents the concept of referring to it as physical distancing rather than social distancing, which I think is a really good way to approach it, particularly with kids. For children, they've lost their social connections. They're no longer able to gather and share, confide in. That's particularly important as they're hitting adolescence and they're trying to individuate and move away from their parents. That's being taken from them. So this idea of social distancing reinforces that, well, then I must shut down and move away from my friends. I'll just sit at home and hope someone might call me. Or a lot of my younger male clients are connecting through gaming instead and talking through there instead. So there's no authentic connection. But if we can turn it back to its physical distancing, but we can still connect with each other socially, that's going to help reduce stress levels. That's proven, that's evidenced, that connection reduces stress, which is what I've put that there for. But the other thing is making sure you're only engaging with people who you feel safe around. If you have a friend that's constantly talking about the death rates, is constantly trying to incite some kind of fear based in you and just ends up using you as a sounding board, they're not the right connection. You're needing a connection that's a two-way street. And for kids, that can be quite hard to find. And I don't like splitting genders, but girls can be better at jumping on FaceTime or whatever it might be and talking. Whereas a lot of boys do struggle with that a lot. And I've seen a lot of my clients really struggle with the idea of, well, I can't connect with anyone. I'll say, who have you talked to in the last week? Mum. Who else have you talked to? My teacher. Well, who else have you talked to? No one. That's gone. And there's no initiation. And I'll mention that a bit later too. A big one. Keep the kids off as much as you can. I know this is easier said than done. Things like YouTube and all of those, really. YouTube, the problem with YouTube is I've got clients that are just listening to the ads that come on in between whatever they're watching, taking that on and then interpreting it in their own way. They're not actually having any discussion with anyone about it, or they're talking to a friend about it and working themselves up. If you're at that point where, okay, you need them to have some time alone and they want to hang out on YouTube and it's making them, and you've got a good relationship with them in a point that you know they're doing the right thing on it, that's fine. But check in on them regularly and say, have you come across any stuff online about COVID? Because it's popping up in places. If you're on a premium account, no problem. But if you're not, just be wary of that. So the line I'm using is be informed, but not overwhelmed. You can take in too much. It's changing too fast. And kids do adapt to changing fast, but not without that sitting down with them and explaining to them what exactly it means. So stay away from all that data.
That can be a really good thing to model as well. I mean, it's a good thing for us to manage our own stress, but a really good thing to help model to the kids as well. Find one place to get your information from. You know, stick to the Department of Human Services website or the WHO website, someone that's giving you, you know, reliable, updated information, but once a day. If it's something you want to check it out once a day, and then open it up as anything that you heard today that you want to talk about. Have like a 5-minute debrief or something if it is something that your child is particularly worried or stressed about. But try and contain it. Have it as, you know, this is the time where we talk about the COVID stuff. And then the rest of the time, we just try and get on with our lives and whatever they look like right now. I think that's a really, really useful thing for us to do, but a really good thing to model to the kids as well. And then they know that, all right, well, 7 o'clock, I can ask mum any questions I like about what I've read today, and she's going to be open to discussing that with me. But they're not going to feel the need to reassurance seek every 5 seconds and drive everybody, including themselves, crazy.
Mm-hmm. And another really good one, which is sort of linked with the next point, is I actually use an app blocker myself. And it can be really good to pop on their phones. You can easily get around it and unlock it if you want to. But the idea is you can then, it also keeps track for you of when you are not locked or blocked, how much time you are spending on a particular site. So if you're checking their phone and they've been hanging out in, I don't know, what's a good example? I was going to say Pinterest. No child uses Pinterest. Why am I saying Pinterest? So you notice they're hanging out an awful lot on just any particular site that they're on there almost at an obsessive level. You can monitor that and then block that more so that they can only access it 1 hour a day or whatever it is. So if they're accessing a particular news site even, they've found one that they really like, keep them off that as much as you can. And they'll probably, the older ones will work out how to get around it, and they might self-sabotage. But if you have that conversation around why you're doing it, that's so important, is the why. They need the why. Then that's what I would really strongly recommend. And I'll give you a separate resource with those details for you. And that links in again with you guys if you're on Facebook, Insta, whatever you're on. If you're getting, you'll get the families that are quite, and this is more to do with schooling, really big on sharing all the amazing projects they're doing in lockdown as in their homeschooling. And they're having the most marvelous time all the time, and they're constantly in your feed, how wonderful isolation is. I'm learning 3 languages and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. If you need to, don't feel guilty in just putting them on follow for a while. Hide them for a while from your feed. You don't have to defriend them or whatever, but you can just give them a bit of a break. Depending on your relationship with them, you can say, look, I'm just having a bit of downtime. I'm seeing that in my feeds a lot. Just taking a couple of days off social media. I'll see you on the other side kind of thing. That's really important for parents to be doing. There's no point starting to, because all that'll do is set up that whole, I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing as much as other parents. And we don't want to do any comparing. Your situation is very different to someone else's. So that's a big one. Avoid big decisions. It's fascinating how many families think that now's a great time to think about buying a new house or something like that. I have a relative currently in that process, which boggles my mind. Big decisions. You can't make wise decisions when you're stressed. If you can, obviously, sometimes that's impossible, but where you can, cut yourself some slack, and just that we'll get to that down the track. It won't hurt if we put that off for a few more months and see where we're at, because we don't know where we're going to be at in a couple of months. We don't know if this current stage 3 is just for 6 weeks or whether it will be extended. We don't know. So just avoid that if you can, and that goes the same for kids as well. They suddenly say, I want to drop out of school. No, I'm not going back to school, or I'm going to be homeschooled. Every second client of mine is all for homeschooling forever now, and no big decisions like that for kids either. Talk them through it. And find time each day to calm down your system, which I'll talk about a bit later. And the last one, which is much, much easier said than done, is self-compassion. And hopefully by doing some of these other things, you start being a little bit kinder to yourself. As a parent, you're not just looking after yourself, you're also looking after a little person or several little people that are relying on you to be in a certain state of mind. So self-compassion is really important. And I'll talk again about that a bit later on. So moving on to clarifying expectations. This is a huge one that's causing a lot of disharmony around homeschooling. And I'll keep doing that because I'll get to explaining why I'm doing that. When you need to sort of stop and say to yourself, well, what exactly do I want for myself from this experience? Is it I just want to be able to get through it with my sanity intact? Do I want my children to feel safe? Or do I want my children to achieve the same academic results that they would have if they were still at school, and I will be there to support them through that? Do I expect myself to be able to work at the same time? Some of us are in the boat where we don't have a job anymore, so that's even more important. Is if you're currently unemployed, what's your actual role? There's a lot of disillusionment around that as well. So that's a conversation, and that's a conversation to have between both parents. The child. Very few families actually sit down with their child and say, you know what you're actually expected to do while we're in these restrictions. The vast majority of them will not know. They will just look blankly at you and say, oh, I'm just doing the same that I was doing at school, but now I'm at home. Now, they're two completely different environments. They're picking up on the stresses of their parents, their siblings. It's just not the same. So what do they expect from you? So do you expect them to complete a full day of school every day? Do you expect them to, now they're home, are you suddenly ramping up the extra chores on them and expecting them to help out more around the house? Are you expecting older siblings to look after younger siblings? Has their role shifted to being part carer? Are they suddenly having to be a sounding board? Are you using your child as a form of counselling to actually sit down and go, look, I really need to get this off my chest? And the same with teachers. A lot of kids aren't aware of what their teachers want from them. And that's the big one I'm going to be talking about next with my teaching hat on, is getting that idea to the teachers that each child is different. They each need to know their expectations from their teacher. So if there's an immense amount of stress around children, especially older primary, younger secondary, seem to be really struggling with this. They're not old enough to really be able to have that conversation with their teachers, so they're sort of going along with it. But they don't know, is it okay? Well, I can't manage maths. I don't know what I'm doing, but my teacher's going to be so mad at me if I don't do it. So I'm going to sit here for 3 hours and try and do it. Yet your teacher actually hasn't thought twice about the maths and actually hadn't even thought to send back any feedback or assessment. So there needs to be that discussion, and I'll go into a little bit about how the best way is to do that. And they need to know, children need to know what you can provide them. So that's linked into what you expect from yourself. Can you be that sounding board for them? Can you be that consistent point of communication? And if you can't, that's okay, but you need to have other support mechanisms in place, whether that's getting your child to call a kids line, they're seeking some assistance from therapy, whatever it might be. Family, this is the big one. Not a lot of families are sitting down as a family and talking about what's expected of all of them. Some of us have got ill family members living somewhere else, and we have got an extra burden of caring for them on top of that. Whose role is that? If you are the essential worker, but you actually were normally home and you were the one that did most of the work with the children on schooling, now you're the one at work, and your partner suddenly has to he can work, or she can work from home. Now suddenly they're left to deal with all the education. How does that work? And has that been agreed upon, or is it just a lot of people just let it fall into place? So you need to discuss that, and whether there's goals out of this. And by a goal, it can be as literal as, let's get through one day. Let's get through today without a massive argument. I'm not talking goals of, as a unit in 2 months, we're going to have renovated the home together and we're all going to be getting A's across the board. Not that kind of goal. I mean, much, much smaller. And that's really important too, is the goals are kept really, really tight, really, really small. And as I said, balancing work and family commitments, that's covered. And consistency between split home arrangements is a huge one. That's already can be a problem without COVID. Now you've got COVID in place, particularly around schooling. How are you setting up that space for your child at each home? How are they going to one home and they're expected to sit there from 9 till 3:30? And then in the other home, it's if you get an hour's done in the morning, I'll be proud of you, mate. All right, yeah, off you go. You need to have consistency that is throwing them off to no end if they do not have that consistency. Same with sleep routine, eating routines. I've had clients that are worrying about food. How are we going to get food if we're in lockdown? What am I going to be eating? And so they're hiding food in their room in case, and that's because they're just worrying that the parents aren't managing. And there's no communication about that and explaining how it actually works. But yes, we can get food delivered. It's fine, nothing that's still going on. But they read something about hoarding toilet paper and off they go, their mind goes. So again, communication is key. It comes back to that time and time again. And then the big one is the teachers in school. So this is where, if you've got questions and you want to rack my brain, go for it. The big one, it's not homeschooling. And I wish media would stop calling it homeschooling. It's not homeschooling. If anyone's been involved in homeschooling, knows someone who's been homeschooled, it's a completely different system. Homeschooling relies really heavily on an invested parent that follows a set curriculum and they are responsible for managing it. Those children that are homeschooled are highly, highly motivated. They're often good with flexible learning, and this is not what we have right now. So it's home, and there you go. It's exactly, Danielle. Did you just write that then? Oh, yeah. Sorry, I wasn't sure if you put that earlier. So yeah, it's definitely not homeschooling, it's home learning. That's exactly right. So don't go, if anyone's trying to give advice on their own, you'll get parents that said, well, I was homeschooled and this is what we do. That's not what you do. It's not going to work with your kids unless they already have got experience in that. So above and beyond, no matter what anyone tells you, please, if you don't take anything else away from this, is mental health and well-being before education. And that's because you cannot learn when you're stressed. No one does, adult, child, it doesn't matter, you will not learn. So there is 0 point pushing the proverbial up the hill, trying to do things around education if that fight response is in full mode. So if that happens, I've got some tips on the next page of what you really should be doing. So firstly, teacher expectations. Some of you, I'm sure, are managing this really well. Some of the clients manage this really well, others need help. We've all got different experiences with teachers. I'm finding the younger teachers, and this is not, I'm quite sure there's some brilliant ones, but a lot of the younger teachers who are maybe only a couple of years out of tertiary study are struggling. They're often under the sort of umbrella of a more experienced teacher, but I've got some doozies of experiences where they're really not managing the differentiation that's needed between students. So by that I mean, as teachers, we don't just give out an assignment or a project and just give it as is to everyone. We need to differentiate within that, depending on what that child's learning needs are. So there's no point just giving out a project and going, off you go, because some children are not going to handle that. Experienced teachers know to differentiate. They know that your child has issues with reading and knows to slow down what's required of that child. But giving out a text, we got to read me 5 chapters by tomorrow, and that's just a blanket thing, is a red flag that your teacher is not really managing it as they should be. And it does create a lot of work, but it's important that you are an advocate for your child in that sense. So you need to advocate and not just say, my child is not very good at maths, okay? They should know that, and if they don't, I'm very concerned at this time of the year. But Do they understand your personal home life circumstances? So I know of an example of a teacher refused to let any of her, this is primary school, any of her students work in a bedroom. So if they were on camera, they had to be in a lounge room or a dining room. They couldn't be anywhere else. This is in a family of 4 children and 2 parents working from home. Now, where's the best place going to be for a child to be able to focus in that situation? It's going to be in their bedroom. So a conversation needs to be had and say, do you understand that we're all at home? There's 6 of us all trying to function at home. That child needs an exemption. That child needs to be able to work in that space. Teachers won't read your minds unless you go and put that forward. So that's just an example. You might be able to think of other things that might be along those lines. And again, flexibility. What kind of flexibility can be built in is the same as differentiation. Make sure they're providing different options, and those options need to be not just so parent focused. They need to be things kids can manage themselves. Have they got any suggestion strategies of how to manage particular learning needs? If your child has learning needs, hopefully your school's already providing some kind of support. So they might be working with an extra support teacher on the side who they might have their own meetings with online, which is great. However, if your child is struggling at home and doesn't normally receive a lot of support, don't assume that they need that same level of support. Their level of support might have grown while they're at home. It won't be the same. So consider requesting extra support. And what does the teacher expect from you as a supervisor? That's a huge one. Some of the projects I've seen being handed out, I've seen grade 6 maths that looks, I've done maths at university, and I'm telling you, this grade 6 maths, I couldn't do it. So what do they expect from you? Ask them, do you expect me to be there for every single activity? You asking me to take them for a nature walk and collect 15 different types of flowers. Well, they can't do that on their own if they're 10. And they need someone. How do I do that when I'm trying to work in my job? And where's the line going to be drawn? Is my child going to be penalised if my child does not participate in that? Or can we skip that? And assessment and feedback. If your child is not getting appropriate feedback, your child will not want to continue doing learning from home. So that's a given in school. They need that feedback from the teacher. There's no point in them slaving away doing all this work and they don't get anything back for weeks. Week turnaround max. Any longer than that, no good, and push for it. A big one too, if your child is struggling, your school should have a wellbeing officer or a teacher that works sort of in the side sort of welfare area. They'll be worked off their feet, no doubt, right now. But if you've never had any contact with them before, that's okay. Still contact them and say, my child's now become really anxious about anything to do with science. I don't know what's causing this. Would you be able to work through it with them? Request that help. It is there, take it. And just a few other points to consider. And down the bottom, I've got some really good resources. Danielle was mentioning earlier about finding a resource that you can access regularly and stick with that one resource. The Education Department, Parents Victoria, and DESE are all good ones that you can stick to with COVID-19 related info. There's information. I've also put one there for supporting students with a disability. That's a big one as well. So, and that disability doesn't have to be a physical disability. Your child might have only just recently been diagnosed with dysgraphia, for example. Or what supports are in place to help them at home, and what do you need? This can also give you extra resources for that. So in terms of managing the challenges at home, it's all the balance between structure and flexibility. And this needs to work with your teacher, does the teacher want them online at a certain time every single day? Can you set it up so that they're in small groups? Some are in big groups, some are in small groups, some offer individual. What does your child need? Secondary kids might need it more in certain subjects. Can they access that teacher more often if they're having trouble? Does your child work better in the morning? Let them do all their work in the morning and let them have the afternoon free. Do you need to work around your own work schedule? does that come into play? Obviously, the older children, teenagers, are much better at managing their own time. But with the younger ones, how is that working around the structure you need for your work versus them learning? And so if they need to be online at 10 and you've got a meeting at 10, you can let the teacher know, look, my child can't be there because I can't be there, or I will remind my child, but he may not turn up if he forgets to come because I'll be working. That kind of stuff. Cut yourself some slack, and teachers are going to be pretty good about this. They've had time to get used to this. They've all had a break. None of them got a break in term 1 holidays. They worked right through. Most took a break term 2 holidays, so they're a bit more refreshed, got their head around it a bit more. So don't be afraid to ask the questions. Boundaries, schedules, all that kind of thing. What do you want to set up amongst the family? That goes back to family expectations. Are the boundaries, is there a certain amount of time on the Xbox? A boundary is in bed by 9. Those kind of things. If you don't keep those routines, you're going to get in a bit of bother. Lots of feedback. Keep the child updated with school COVID changes. We've talked about that. One that I really want to touch on, I learnt this just recently in some training. Praise, but done in a specific empowering way. So a lot of parents you'll hear say, well done. So little Johnny comes in and goes, I got an A, or I got a C. Yay, go me. And you just, oh, well done. They've actually done studies to show that over time, if that's all they get as a response, they start going, I'm just going to get that same response. You've got to either vary it or change the way you do it. And the example I've given is you say, well done, versus, wow, I can see how excited you are to get that B. All that hard work has paid off. So you're actually praising what they did. So you're telling them you've listened specifically to what they're happy about, but you've also you haven't just done it as a sort of a brush away kind of thing. You've actually specified what they did well. So all that hard work paid off. They're more likely to then give more hard work on the next task. Hope that makes sense.
A lot of this stuff, I think, fits really nicely in that idea of attunement. So, and attunement is really difficult when we're under flight and fight. It's really hard to tune into your kid or your partner or whoever it might be and notice how they're feeling and what's happening for them when you're feeling really, really stressed and anxious. So again, it comes back to managing the flight and fight within yourself so you're able to attune to then what the kids need, what the family needs as a whole, working out what kind of flexible structure is going to work for you guys. You'll do much better at that if you're able to really tune in and meet them where they're at. But to do that, you've got to be taking care of yourself as well. I think that was just because that's kind of reading through that and talking about this with you before. I think that for me, that's the common thread. That's what's sort of holding all of this together, or where it needs to all sort of hold together, is having the space, the emotional space, to actually really tune in and see what's happening to the other people in the household, which is very hard to do right now.
Absolutely. And I mean, these, by no means am I expecting everyone to go away and go, right, okay, Amanda's got this list of dot points and I need to do each of them to be successful. If one of these is taken on, that's enough. Again, it's back to that self-compassion. Don't suddenly feel like you've got to be super mum and super dad. But that can be a really powerful one that's easy to do, which is not well known. It's not a well-known one. And it's a really good one for resilience, which kids are finding it harder and harder when they just keep getting hit with more and more of these restrictions to keep going. There's a big drop in, those of you with kids noticed towards the end of term 2, no one was virtually doing any learning at home. No. They'd run out of steam, and so had the parents, which was absolutely fair enough. And because I'm just aware of the time, hopefully you've all read those, and if there's any of those specifically you want to ask me about, go for it. But the bottom one is really important. You can take wellbeing days at school when you're physically at school, don't be afraid to still do them when you're at home. Don't change that mode of operation. For some reason, there's this mentality that, well, I'm at home, so I can't do that. It's a bit, I'm not having to worry about getting in my uniform and all that. You still need that well-being day occasionally if you need it, or if the whole family just needs a breather, you just want to sleep. Consider it, plan for it. As I've said, they're planned for fun. We are limited in what we can do, and sometimes you see these poor 13, 14-year-olds being dragged around the streets with their family, and I'm sure they can think of better places to be. But get creative. I've seen families doing Christmas in July. They're around the table and they've all got presents ordered online, and do a little get together. Get creative in how you're doing that. I'm not saying you all have to sit down and suffer through a game of Monopoly every night, but plan ahead for some fun so the kids have got something to look forward to and you've got something to look forward to. And the last little bit, these are some specific things that I've noticed coming up. If you're noticing the kids are using a lot of musts, should, what if, there's a lot of that going around, and can't. That's really big at the moment. Be aware if your child is doing that, we need to help reframe that for them. So having a conversation, what if? So what if, so clinicians, you guys know the whole idea of what if. So what's the worst possible, what's the best scenario, work for in between, bridging conversation, reframing the language of must and should. Really important. Again, you've got to be in the right state of mind for that, as Danielle said. Feeling words. Some kids are great at understanding their feelings. Others have very poor emotional literacy. If you've got a child that's really struggling to express what's going on in terms of feelings, so they talk in the language of I think all the time, I think rather than I feel, best thing would be to seek some help from a therapist if it's impacting on family life and impacting on them and their schooling and their social life. Get some support, because you need a bit of work that's not something that's just fixed with a conversation. And gratitude and kindness. In my resources I'll send you guys to, there's stuff around gratitude. Go to bed, before you go to sleep every night, think of 3 things you're grateful for. 3 positive things that you were able to achieve today. It could be, I got up, I got out of bed this morning. That can be it, seriously. Social needs, encourage them to initiate social connection. A lot of them sit around waiting, especially the boys. Get them to organise a group meet online, and it doesn't matter if they're playing gaming, whatever they want to do, get your child to initiate that. That's disappearing. And talk about with your child about loss of friendships, connection, and milestones. Milestones can be really massive. Kids that were ready to get their L's can't get their L's. Grade sixes can't go on camp, which is a huge one. It might be year 7s and preps particularly, very, very worried about losing friendships that they'd just established and now they've lost them. And they're worrying immensely about whether or not they'll still be friends. Encourage them to keep in contact. Preps is a bit different, but year 7s most certainly can hop online and chat to their friends, try and keep that connection going for them. They might need a bit of help with that. Gaming's the last one, and I've left that till last because I'm sure that's driving many people quite mad. But what I've noticed is a lot of kids are using that as a coping strategy. If they're doing that, try really hard to not get into an argument about when to turn it off. Set boundaries before they get on it. If you need a PS4 schedule that's agreed upon, it can't be you writing the schedule and going, there you go, this is when you're allowed on the PS4. Talk with them, agree on times that it's appropriate for them to be on it, and stick with it. If they cannot get off themselves, and if they're not able to get off, have a conversation about why can't you get off. And it's very rarely going to be because I wanted to win that round. They're often on there talking to friends, and be aware of this concept of friends now. These friends can just be online gamers. They're not friends. So kids are thinking they're being sociable, but they're not. They're not socializing with true friends. So just have a conversation about that too. And they're using it to connect. So don't rob them of it, but find that balance, and have consequences for if they can't stick with that. There has to be consequences. If you need to go back to a dongle type arrangement so that they literally can't access online gaming, go for it. Obviously, the older they get, it changes as well, but I'm seeing as young as 9, they are using gaming as a way to connect. And if your child at 9 or 10 is thinking it's appropriate to playing Fortnite, Call of Duty, any of those ones, get them off it. They're not appropriate for that age bracket, and it's becoming, there are so many great games out there. Those ones are rated 14 plus for a reason. Call of Duty, absolutely not for a 9-year-old. And I've seen it time and time again. So that conversation needs to be had too. I know it's a hard one, again, if you've already established rules, but you could reframe it as, now we're in restrictions, we need to look at that differently. Yeah. So I hope that made sense, and I'm happy to answer anything on that if you
Excellent. And if anybody does have questions about that, Amanda and our IT guy Matthew are across all of the games. They are amazingly fluent in gamer language and gamer speak, and in which games are appropriate for different ages. I know kind of some of the main ones, but I get lost with these two. So
I'm a game nerd. I live with a game nerd, and I am one. So yes, I can talk the teenage boy speak quite well, luckily. But yes.
Because sometimes it's really hard for a parent to know, look, my kid's getting so much out of this game, they're spending lots of time on it, it seems okay, but that it's not like you're sitting there watching them play the whole time. You don't know all the ins and outs of the games. So if you do have any questions about specific games as well, you can, ask tonight or send us an email, and we'll give you an idea of, yep, that one's okay for a 10-year-old, or that one, yeah, no, don't let them do that one. Because some of them are actually, they're kind of sneaky. All right, so we've got 5 minutes left of the hour. We will send everybody out these the slides, so you'll have everything on here, including all of the resources that Amanda has compiled for you.
I'll send you a PDF with a whole lot of coping skills strategies, and I've highlighted the ones that work well with kids. And all this is around being able to calm your own nervous system down to be able to function. So the coping skills is really important. And then I've also got another PDF with suitable apps that are great for kids and teenagers and adults, and also some links to websites that have oodles and oodles of resources for supporting both you and your kids in these tricky times. So hopefully you find them valuable too.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to finish recording. So I'm stopping